Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. So the section we will start in 3 minutes to allow more people to join. We have audience come from different platform like YouTube, Meetup, or LinkedIn. And if you have any question, feel free to post it. And if you're in the Zoom, and you can unmute yourself. This is a Ask Me Anything sections, and feel free to ask anything.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start the recording just so you can watch it back in the future. And I'll give a brief introduction of myself and we'll get started with any questions. Okay. So welcome to this Ask Me Anything question session. My name is Tian Xu. I am an instructor at WeCloud for the past few years. And I'm here basically to answer any questions that you may have about specifically Python in the workplace. Okay, so if you do have any questions, feel free to speak up by unmuting yourself or just typing into the chat, and I will try my best to answer all the questions I see. Okay, if there's no questions, I'll give you some advice of what I have experienced in the job market and also what I've heard from the students as well. Okay. So the first question comes from YouTube. It says Spark using Python or Scala using Spark, which is more efficient to run. So I would say because Scala is a legacy language, so it is kind of harder to program, but it is faster to run, right? So in that sense, Scala with Spark will be slightly faster. But to most programmers, you're used to Python, right? Python is a language that is, I would say, more similar to the English language. So for those of you who are English speaking, you can see that Python is basically writing a sentence or a paragraph in code and making it do some kind of job, right? Whereas for Scala, there is a lot more code that you have to write to do the same job as it is in Python. Speaking of that, Spark using Python, well, Python is built on top of Scala. So even if you are running the code in Spark using Python, internally, it actually converts that code into Scala code, that's Spark using Python, right? It actually internally converts that code into Scala code and run it there and then converts the result back into a Python output, right? So that's why it is slightly slower to use Python than using Scala directly. But like I said, because Python is, I would say, one of the more popular languages and so similar to English that most people would prefer to use Spark with Python instead of Spark with Scala. So if there's, again, any questions, feel free to type into the chat or just turn on your mic, okay? In the meantime, let me just give you a brief kind of introduction for those of you who are not familiar about Python, right? So Python is a very, I would say, simple programming language. There is a slight learning curve for those of you who are not used to Python, okay? So some of the things you have to remember when you're working with Python is that one, it is case sensitive, right? So a capital A and a lowercase a are two different variables. Okay? In languages like SQL, it is not case sensitive, right? So you can have, let's say, capital, let's say Tianshu, right? T, capital T-I-A-N, and lowercase T-I-A-N. They're the same thing, right? But in Python, they're two entirely different things. Now that usually comes into play with kind of predefined keywords, such as true and false, right? Those have to be capitalized for the first letter and lowercase for the rest. Okay. The second thing you have to remember when you're working with Python is to have indentation. Okay. Again, comparing this to SQL, in SQL, it doesn't matter how you write the code, as long as it is within a block of code indicated by the semicolon separator, the program will read the entire thing and run it as one code. Okay. In Python, it usually reads one line at a time. So one line of code is the entire code. Right? You don't have to put any separators at the end to indicate that it is done. Okay. However, if you are writing loops, for example, or if else statements, you would need to put a colon at the end of the first line and then indent it on the second and third lines. Okay. So that tells Python that your code is not done yet. The rest of the code continues on in the following lines. Okay. Similarly, you can add a backward slash to show that the code continues on the following line, so on and so forth. Okay. But for the indentation, especially with loops, or sorry, yes, I haven't shown my screen, so let me just take out maybe this one will be better, right? So I'm going to demonstrate how to get to Google Colabs, which is a kind of free workspace that you can use for Python, and this is in Google Drive. Okay, so I'll show you that in just a bit. But speaking of that, in Python, right? So if you are writing loops, for example, so let's say for n in range of 10, okay, and you want to say print n, okay, you have to have this indentation to say that this statement is part of the loop. So it's inside this loop. Okay. So if I run this code, you see that it prints out every number from 0 to 9 because in Python, it starts with index 0 and with range is exclusive. So it stops at the number before the one you put in here. Okay. On the other hand, if I were to do, let's say x equal to 10 and then 4 X in range 10. Okay, and I do, let's say, for Y in range 10, and I do X plus Y. Okay, and I do print. Sorry, 1 second. Print X or print Y, let's say. Okay. Notice how this code is not indented, so it's not inside the loop. So you'll wait until the entire loop has finished, so 0 to 9, okay? And you print out the last assignment to the variable. Okay? So again, indentation in Python is very important, especially if you have nested loops or nested if-else statements. Okay, the indent will tell Python which part belongs to the first loop, which part belongs to the outer loop, and so on and so forth. So speaking or looking at Google Colab, let's talk about how to access Google Colab. Okay. The easiest way is just to search for Google Colab in Google, and the first one will be Welcome to Colab. Now you do need to have your own Google account, okay? But this is free to you as well. And also you can access Google Colab just from your Drive. Sorry, give me 1 second. So if I just go to my Drive, okay, I can just create a new and go to more. There's Google Colab. Okay, so you can access it either way, search it on Google, or after you add it as an extension or as an app, you can just find it in your dropdown list. Okay, and in here, you are given a workspace to write your code or to run your code as well. And with Google Colab, just like with other Google documents, you can share this with someone else and you can actually work together. Okay. So if I just duplicate this, maybe you can see the cursor. Not too much, but you can start typing here and you will should reflect. 1 second here. It's not working the way I wanted to, but it should reflect on the other end as well. Okay. So with Google Colab, you can work together instead of writing your code offline by installing Python, installing other editors, saving the file, and then sending over to other people. For Google Colab, you can also add files by uploading them from your own computer and just importing it directly. Okay. You can also install packages. So using pip install in Google Colab as well, okay, just like you would do in, let's say, Anaconda. Okay. And you can also connect to your Google Drive as well. Okay. For that, you would need to import Drive and you would need to do a manual kind of authorization step, which is simple, like allow just to access your Drive. And you can write your code by accessing any files you have in your Drive. So any questions about Python or about Google Colab at this time? Right. In that case, let me just talk about why you would want to know Python, right? So for any of you who have not experienced with Python before, why is a good idea for you to learn instead of using other tools like SAS or SQL, right? So first off, I'm not saying that Python is replacing all the other languages. So there are still job postings that ask for C++. There are still job postings that ask for Java. Of course, there are job postings asking for SQL, and there's more and more jobs asking for big data, right? So computing on the cloud. Okay. But there is a trend, I would say, that is emerging with people using Python. Okay, like the advantage I said before is very similar to English. And so when you write the code, it's kind of just be how you speak, right? So when you read the code, you can see, okay, so for this code that I have here, I'm saying for n in this range, right? Just print out these numbers, print out these n's, right? So unlike with Java or C++, you had to define some of the functions and the code gets complicated. The other advantage is that Python is an open source language, which means that not only is it free, but community members also contribute to Python environment. And so there's a lot of libraries that you can install and import for free that are designed and tested by other users of Python. Okay, so some of the more popular ones that you probably heard of, Pandas is a very useful library for working with data frames, right? Then we have sklearn, usually for machine learning. Okay, we also have NumPy for calculations. Okay? And all these as that I put for both Pandas and NumPy, these are by convention. Okay? So when you are reading other people's code and you see these shorthand forms, right, that should tell you that PD is Pandas, so there's a Pandas library. NP is NumPy, so in the NumPy library. Okay? I would say 99% of the case, that is true. Sometimes people do use them as shorthand forms for their own code, but that's very unlikely. Okay? Similarly, you can also use other aliases as well to refer to these packages or no alias at all, just like sklearn. Okay? But again, by convention, these are the ones. Okay? And due to the increasing number of libraries from users from the community, it actually makes your job easier and easier, right? So if you want to do some kind of calculation, so for example, if I want to do, let's say, a let's say a square root calculation, right? So instead of me writing out a calculation or a square root definition, I know it's in NumPy. So I can just do NumPy dot square root and then do 9. I didn't import it, sorry. Right? So the calculation will be done for me instead of me having to write out all those code, right? Similarly with a lot of other libraries. So there are things like matplotlib, which makes graphs. There are things like TensorFlow, which does deep learning, right? More advanced machine learning. So all that, you don't have to start from scratch all the time. And you don't have to kind of copy and paste large chunk of code. All I have to do is import. Now with importing, you do have to be aware of that these are predefined functions and predefined methods. So there are some restrictions and some white paper or documents that you have to follow. Okay? So you can't just put in random things. So if I were to put, let's say, a string instead, this doesn't work because it's looking for a numerical input, right? But you can define your own function by allowing strings into it. Okay? So a simplest way is to convert the string into integer and then put it into NumPy itself to do the calculation. Okay? Again, any questions at this time before I continue? Okay. So how about this? Let me show you um what's well how useful Python is in the job market, right? So by just going into Indeed, for example, okay, and I'm just going to type in Python as a skill, okay. So there's a lot of use cases. I would say data librarian probably is to manage data warehouse, data base, developers for sure. There is even data scientists, if I can find some, analyst, specialist, um, again, developer, a lot of them are engineers, right? So a lot of these jobs do require Python skills, okay? Do require Python skills, but they also require other programs as well, right? So it's not just you know Python, you can apply to all these jobs, but knowing Python will give you a big advantage as a lot of jobs do require you to know Python. Okay. And again, like I said, Python is not the only language that's being asked. So if you look at data scientist, okay, there are some jobs that ask for, let me just see if I can find one here. There are some jobs that actually ask you for, not this one is Python as well, but they will ask you for, let's say, C++ or Java. So it doesn't mean that if you know those languages, but not Python, you cannot find a job. But I'll say it is more beneficial to know Python as it is one of the more popular ones, right? So here you ask for SAS. So just take a look at the jobs that you want. Here's just a very rudimentary search, right? But take a look at the jobs that you do want and see what the requirements are, okay? But you find out most of the time, Python will be one of the requirements, okay? It's probably not going to be the only requirement. Right. So the next thing I want to show you is how to practice your Python skills. Right. So in WeCloudData, we do have our short courses, our self-paced course, and our bootcamps that will teach you these skills. Okay. But I would say just learning the skills, having a mentor, having a teacher is a great start. But that's not the end of your journey. Okay? You always need to keep practicing your skills so that you stay on top of it. And sometimes, you do forget a little bit. So you might want to practice some of the easier skills as well. So one of the best place for Python, I would say, is LeetCode. Again, it is a free website. You do have to sign up for an account. You can pay for the premium, but I don't think that is necessary. Okay, so you can sign in and go to problems. Okay. So in here, there is multiple different problem sets. They do add new ones, I think weekly due to their competition. Okay. So they do have like these contests that you can try out, a weekly contest, and these questions will be added into the problem set after the contest closes. Okay. So you will see that the list is always growing. Okay. A good thing about LeetCode is that not only does it show you the difficulty levels, you can filter by you can filter by what you need. Right? So what kind of skills you want to practice, what kind of things that you want to try out. And in each of the questions, there is a coding session. So you can choose your own language, Python 3, right? Choose your own language, type out the code, and once you sign in, you can run your code. You can change the test cases. It's not letting me do it right now, but you can change your test cases to test your code on different things. There are a lot of built-in test cases as well. So it's not just these examples, but there's many, many more, okay? To see if your function is working correctly. Okay? And I'll say one of the uh, best part about LeetCode is that there are discussions, okay, about different solutions that you have. So if you have a solution, you can post it into discussion board, and other people will give you some comments on why they think it is good or bad. Right? If there's any suggestions or any other questions that you can try out. Okay. So it's a very kind of community-driven website as well. Okay. So any of you who are looking to practice your skill and don't know where to start, I'll say LeetCode is the best place to start. Okay. And I have found that some of the technical interviews, they do take questions from LeetCode and modify it a little bit and put that out as the actual questions in those interviews. Okay, so it might not be the exact questions that you have practiced, but once you practice enough, you know the common things to put in, what common things to look for. Okay, and make that will make your technical interview much easier. Okay. Another website I can introduce you to is called HackerRank. And again, HackerRank, you would want to sign up for an account. Okay, so you can keep track of your progress. They call them challenges, but basically it is the same as LeetCode, right? So you can write your code in here. You can test your code against custom input or against the predefined input. Okay. The difference between HackerRank and LeetCode is that HackerRank tests you on the print function a lot, whereas LeetCode tests you on the functions. So how to write a user-defined function. Okay. If we do a comparison, I would say writing a function will be more useful in your job than learning how to use the print function. Okay. There are times you do need to print out the result using a print function, but I'll say knowing how to work with functions, user-defined functions, is more important than using print. But the skills that you can test here are very similar. And so you can try out both HackerRank and LeetCode to see how you fare and to kind of review your skill set. So again, any questions from the audience? Anything related to Python? We're pretty shy today. That's fine. Okay. Let me just ask you this. What else do you want to know about Python or the workplace? Okay. So again, feel free to turn on your mic or just type in the chat if it's more convenient for you. But or like, why did you want to join the session to learn about Python? So for those who are still with us, let's talk about like what other things you need to prepare besides your technical skills with Python, right? Because a lot of times when you are applying for jobs, the technical interview doesn't come at the beginning. It comes after a few rounds of interviews. A lot of times those interviews are done by either HR or by a member of their hiring team based on not only behavioral questions, but more on your knowledge of your tools, right? So if they are asking you about Python, they may ask you things about, let's say, why is Python uh, important, or how do you handle this, right? In Python, what kind of things would you consider when you're writing a code in Python, right? So they're not going to ask you to write the code out itself, but they want you to walk through your reasoning, okay, and talk about possible solutions. So they might give you an example like, okay, how do um, so I have two data sets that are from different stores. Okay, they are selling similar products, but some of them might be called the same name, but they're different products. Some products might be called different name, but they're same products. Right. So how do I consolidate two data sets so that I know exactly what is in the inventory and which product are doing what? Right. So with those kind of questions, we're not going to be asked you to write out the code because there's nothing for you to put into Colab or to your Python environment, right? So you have to start thinking about your thought process, right? So you might start thinking about, okay, maybe you can use regex to match up some of the keywords in the product names. You might be able to match up their, let's say, ISBN numbers, right? So that um, same product with different names will still match up. You might look up, let's say, prices. So same product might be similar in price. It might be off, let's say, $1 or two, but overall, there shouldn't be too much of difference. You might look at product names, product descriptions, right? So those are the things that you can talk about, right? And then again, put in what you would actually do, right? So not just talk in theory, but talk about the libraries or the functions that you know, right? So I can use regex to do some kind of string matching between the descriptions of the products. I can keep a dictionary of commonly abbreviated words or misspelled words so that I can go through the list and see how many would actually match up. I can design a function that will compare the prices and have a closest neighbor, and anything that's close enough could indicate that it's a similar product or the same product, right? So those are the kind of things that you can talk about, right? And with those interviews, it's not writing a solution, it's not getting to the desired output, but it's more about the thought process. Okay? And throughout those kind of interviews, you would want to ask questions or make your assumptions known to the interviewer, right? So you can say, well, I'm going to assume that in the database, there are brand names, there's product names, there's product descriptions, and there's prices, and probably identifier, right? And then from those columns, I can use so and so, right? And then the interviewer might come back and challenge you a bit more, right? So let's, okay, what if there is no product ID, right? What if there is no product identifier number, right? So there's no ISBN. How would you match up the same product, right? Or they may say, okay, what if the two stores, they use very different columns or very different column names, right? How would you match up the column names? Do you have to do that manually? Can you do that automatically? Those kind of things, right? So when you're studying Python, you also have to think about your thought process when you're writing the code, right? So why do you need this line of code? Is it absolutely necessary? Can it be omitted? Can it be combined with other code, right? And how does that affect the rest of your notebook? And how does that affect your efficiency? Okay. So speaking of efficiency, that is the next important things that you have to think about, right? When you're writing a code, well, at a technical interview, your first job is to make sure your code works. Okay. Most technical interviews, they'll either give you a sample data set or they will ask you to go to a website like LeetCode or HackerRank and submit your answer on a set of questions. Right? So your first job is to make sure that your code can actually solve the problem. Okay? Because even if you write a very beautiful code, but it doesn't produce the desired output or it doesn't produce the correct output, then to the hiring manager, it means that either you don't have the technical know-how or you're misinterpreting the questions, which is very bad, right? So first job, make sure you get your desired output. Okay. After that, if you do have more time, okay, think about how to optimize your code. So think about, are there any variables that you can leave out? Maybe every variable that you create takes up space in memory. Okay, so Python is a very object-oriented programming. So when you create a data frame, you'll be saved into RAM. When you create a filtered data frame, you'll be saved as a second data frame in RAM. Right? So the first one will be there, the second one will also be there. Right? So as you create more and more variables, it takes up more and more space. And depending on how powerful your workstation is or how powerful your virtual machines are, right, you could run out of space by creating unnecessary variables. Right? So the second thing that you want to do after your code works is to make sure you're not creating unnecessary variables, right, and simplify your code. Okay. Then you can think about your time efficiency. Right? Are there any loops that might be unnecessary? Are there any if-else statements that I can write so that it works faster? Right? So instead of checking the if condition, I might just check the not if condition, right? The else condition. Right? Or there might be too many cases where I'm going to take some of them out because it doesn't affect my overall statement. Right? After that, then you have to think about edge cases. Okay, so what if something were to happen, right? So let's say with the age column, right? What if someone didn't put in an age, right? Maybe because it's not mandatory. How do you segment the customer for those ones, right? What if someone puts in a random number, right? So let's say they put like 150 or 990, right? How do you handle those numbers? What if they put in, weird numbers? Let's say they put like 17.5, right? Instead of a whole number, right? So how would you handle those kind of edge cases? Okay. Even if the companies themselves will not have those edge cases, because you handled it, because you talked about it, it will show that you're more efficient with Python, and it will show to the hiring team that you're not just doing the task as it is, but you are actually thinking about possibilities, right? Thinking about how to handle these possible errors. Okay. Now, in most cases, especially if you're new to the technical interviews, or especially if the technical interview is very long, you may not have time to do all those steps, right? So again, the first job is to make sure it works. But once you make it work, you may have run out of time. So you don't have time to go back and optimize. You don't have time to go back and think about edge cases. And that's fine. Because usually after your technical interview, there is another kind of phone interview or face-to-face interview where they'll ask you questions about your code, right? So those will be the time when you want to talk about your code. Why do you write this line? How would you optimize it if you had more time, right? Is there anything that you would change? Is there anything that you can consider? If they give you an edge case, how would you implement it into code? Okay? So with technical interview is not just submit your code and you're done. Continue thinking about it, because most likely in the next round you will be asked questions about your code. Okay? If possible, when you are submitting your technical interviews, add documentations as well. Right? So in most editors, okay, so let's say 4x in range 20, okay, right, x, right? In most editors, you can write code directly, but you can also add comments by just using the hashtag symbol, right? So you can say creating a for loop, okay, and you can say printing out the value of x for each iteration. Right? Now, of course, you don't have to write something so simple like this in your actual technical interview, right? But you want to put in documentation for anything that you think is important, right? So maybe this line of code is to filter out missing values, right? So put that in. This line of code is to standardize the spelling, right? So put that in. Okay, so the documentation will make it easier for the evaluators to understand your code, right? And in the real workplace, you want documentation as well, because most times your code is not just used by you, right? You're writing a code that is usually shared by your team. So you don't want someone to always come to you and say, okay, what does this line of code do? Okay, can you explain to me what this is doing, right? Why did you put this here, right? You don't want those kind of questions, right? So you want to kind of explain your code, but of course you don't need to explain something so simple like this, right? You don't have to explain what is a print statement, what is a for loop, right? But any user-defined functions, explain your thought process, what is going on, right? Why do you need that? If you are doing a lot of nested statements, right? Nested for loops or nested if else statements, explain that as well, right? Why do you need all that? Okay. So keep that in mind when you are doing coding practice, uh, because you want to get in the habit of making sure other people can read your code and understand it just as you intended to be. Okay. I would say that is one of the biggest hurdles a lot of our students have faced. Right? They can write the code, they can write it out perfectly, they can explain it on the spot. Right? So when we ask them the next day, they can tell us perfectly, right, what the code does. But after a week, after months, after they work on another project, and we ask them again to explain this code, they themselves will tend to forget. Right? So kind of read the code again, it's like, I think I was doing that, but I'm not sure anymore. Right? So you don't want that to happen. Right? Put in some documentations, adding a few lines of comments that will help you greatly. Okay? Especially in your job, there might be chunks of code that you can just copy and paste over. Right? But if you don't remember what it does, then it's very dangerous to do copy and paste. Right? Because you might paste it over and you see that it does exactly something opposite to what you want. Okay? Yeah. So with Python, there is no cost really, right? So you can just get free programs like Colab or just download Python into your own environment and just write code. Okay. If you get stuck, you can always stop it. So you can always go to like runtime and interrupt, right? Or just disconnect, right? You can always stop the code if it's stuck, and you can always search for these type of errors, right? By just copy and pasting them into Google. Okay, that will be the best way to review, to learn by yourself. Okay? But like I mentioned, if you do want a more guided approach, we do have multiple short courses, open courses, and self-paced courses, as well as a long bootcamp for you to join to learn different skills of different tools. Right? So if you're interested, feel free to contact me or Adam later on. Okay? But again, any questions for our AMA session? All right. Since there are no other questions, we'll call it a day here. So thank you everyone for joining us, joining Lens for the session. If you do think of any questions in the future, feel free to reach out to us as well. Other than that, have a good day, and hopefully we'll see you again in the future. Okay, bye everyone.